Hey everyone, so today we're going to do another video on drawing different textures in rocks. The last video that I made was different types of wood, and that was a fun little exercise, and I think a lot of people enjoyed it. So here we are back with different types of rocks. Before I get started, I wanted to show you guys the ink I'll be using, Speedball Super Black. And this paper is Canson mixed media art paper. It's a nice little sketchbook. If any of you are going to be doing Inktober this year like I am, it's kind of a nice little spiral bound book to use. Okay, so I've got 4 different kinds of rocks here I thought would be interesting to demonstrate textures. So the first one is just kind of a standard run-of-the-mill sharp edge square planed trapezoidal rock. Nothing special here. And I'm just going to start by kind of outlining the various sides. And I'm using my Hunt 101 pen, which I believe is the same pen that I used on the last video. So just putting in the outlines. And I've got a crack running through it here. A couple of cracks. All right, so on this rock, I think what I'll do is have the light coming from kind of this direction here. And so I'm going to make medium thickness lines with the Hunt 101. Since this is the side of the rock that'll be in shadow the most. Of course, making wider lines means that the pen runs out of ink faster. So I'll dip more frequently. Just thought I'd weave in a few lines of a different direction just to make it interesting. Do the same thing over here. It just breaks up what would otherwise be a monotonous series of lines. I know I'm always talking about adding interest to an area, and it definitely does. That's why I bring it up so much. And we're just establishing a nice even tone here. So we could cross-hatch this once this first row of lines is done. If I wanted to, I could come back and cross-hatch, but I don't know, I might leave it just with a single direction of hatch marks. This little plane right here, I'm going to do fairly light because it's closer to the light source, as is this plane here. Sometimes it's nice along an edge like this, instead of running these lines right up to that edge, it's kind of a nicer way to finish that off by having a couple parallel lines with this line, just to, it helps to not look like it's just outlined, but rather more like it's part of the hatch work. See how this area here has a different, it's represented quite a bit differently than what you have here, where the lines just abut right up to the outline. It gives it just a more, a little more finished appearance. And then on this surface, I'm going to run the lines in a different direction. Notice how on each plane I try to run the lines in a slightly different direction. Visually, that helps to establish that we're looking at a different plane. Some imperfections always go a long way when drawing rocks, because they're generally full of imperfections. So you can go ahead and use your dots, short line segments, to just establish a texture. Pretty basic. Fairly recognizable as a rock. And as far as the dots go, we can add as many or as few as we like. And we can do the same thing on the dark side as well. Okay, and this other kind of rock is going to be a smooth, rounded stone that we might find on a riverbed or a shore of a lake or ocean. After establishing the outline, I'm just going to come in and darken the bottom portion to establish the shadow side, shadowed edge, just like so. And now what I'm going to do is, instead of using more or less straight lines like I did here, I'm going to use curved lines, and just going to follow this shadowed edge with those curved lines. Now I'm going to go back and soften this gradation from the hard, solid shadow to this lighter shadow by just thickening the ends of these lines. Let me zoom in a little bit on this for you so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just building out the base of these lines to create that gradation gives the impression of that line getting thicker. Now we could accomplish the same thing by increasing the pressure as I draw the line, but what that would do is that would leave a huge amount of ink right here. The pen would have a tendency to deposit that ink, especially if I'm meeting up with this heavy line here, because the surface tension of the ink that I'm laying down would hit this ink right here and it would pull it out. So instead, I'm just doing a thin line, letting it somewhat dry, and then going back and adding to it. It's just a much cleaner way of doing it, and more uniform as well. Hope that makes sense. I'll have to demonstrate that in a separate video sometime. And then we can come over on the other end of the lines and do a little separated dot like that at the end, or a series of dots. And that can kind of feather out that line and provide even more of a gradual tone shift from the lines to the blank white here. Doesn't have to be done, but it's just an additional thing that you can do to merge the shadow. A few little pock marks in the rock. Just like we did up here, these lines that parallel the outline help to make it look less outlined. And just like above, as many dots as you want to add. It just adds more texture, more interest, but you can really do as many or as few as you want. That's half the art of being an artist, is knowing sometimes when to stop with whatever medium that you're working with. When is enough enough? And it's really just a matter of personal taste. So there, more of a rounded stone. I've got here something that would be, I suppose you consider this a meteorite. Meteorite type rock. Sometimes you find rocks that have these craters in them. Sometimes it's just from water erosion. I thought that would be a fun thing to draw, so here goes. Just following my very basic pencil sketch. And this one is going to be kind of a cross between the other two types that I have here. You've got some hard edge to it, but there's also a softness and a roundness to some of the surfaces. So I'm going to establish the shadows first. And of course, those would be on the shadow side of the rock, but also inside these pits that dot the surface. So some nice curved lines following the contour. Light direction is coming from this way, as you've guessed. Nice heavy lines down here. See, I'm kind of curving all these lines, except for these lines up here. Most of these are going to be curved. I do a lot of going back and reinforcing lines. I tend to draw them a little bit lighter because I can always go back and thicken them if I see the need. There's not quite as much shadow in this crater right here. And I'm using these lines to just indicate the shape. And in come the dots. What looks like a little meteorite. So 3 very different textures going on here. Zoom back out, we can see all 3 of them. Now this 4th one that I've got is crystals, which are kind of a tricky thing to ink. I'm going to pause the video here for the YouTube audience. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. And the remainder of this video will be for my patrons. I do extended versions of all my videos, and I make those available on Patreon. If you're interested, there will be a link in the description box below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.